On a sun-kissed Saturday afternoon in the suburban enclave of Brookside Hills, an air of tranquil order reigned. Row after row of neat houses, each conforming to identical architectural guidelines, lined the maple-shaded streets. Manicured lawns stretched out, mailboxes stood uniformly, and not a single garbage bin lay out of place. All of this tidy uniformity was enforced by the Brookside Hills Homeowners Association, or the HOA, which prided itself on maintaining property values and a harmonious visual environment. The HOA's board members were a mixture of well-intentioned residents and a few zealots who seemed to relish the power. At the heart of this cluster was Maribel Farnett, although almost everyone privately referred to her by the dreaded moniker Karen. Ostensibly in her mid-50s, with short, impeccably styled hair, Karen marched around the neighborhood in crisp business attire even on weekends. Clutched under her arm at all times was a ring binder crammed with the HOA's dense set of bylaws and amendments. She would pinpoint any perceived infraction, be it a mailbox left ajar, a garden gnome an inch too tall, or a front door painted a shade not on the official palette. Over the past year, Karen had intensified her scrutiny. She pinned notices for minor transgressions, orchestrated petty fines, and emailed neighbors incessantly about upholding standards. Most residents kept their heads down, finding it easier to comply or pay nominal fines than to argue. Yet, behind closed doors, many whispered about Karen's bossiness. They vented their frustrations on the neighborhood's private social media groups, calling her a tyrant disguised as a board member, but few dared to challenge her openly. Amid this environment, an 82-year-old retiree named Henry Martin, fondly called Grandpa Henry by the neighborhood kids, resided in a modest home near the entrance to the development. Henry was a war veteran and a widower. He lived alone, though his adult children visited on holidays. Slow-moving and arthritic, he relied on a sturdy cane wherever he went, an old wooden staff with a gently curved handle, worn smooth from years of use. The design was unremarkable, but Henry treasured it, recalling that it was a gift from his late wife. The cane had become as much a companion as a mobility aid. Little did Henry realize that his innocent habit of resting his cane briefly in the shared lobby or hallway would become the catalyst for Karen's newest crusade. She had spent months searching for some violation on Henry's property, but had come up empty. His lawn was maintained, his paint scheme correct, his trash bins properly stored. Then, as the seasons shifted and Henry sometimes placed his cane near the entrance to a small community center in the development, a spark ignited in Karen's mind. Perhaps she could brand his cane as a safety hazard, setting the stage for a conflict that would enrage every empathetic soul in Brookside Hills. The Brookside Hills Homeowners Association boasted a small, yet well-maintained community hall, located a short walk from Henry's house. This hall contained a comfortable lounge, a modest library shelf, and a few chairs where residents could sip coffee or read newspapers. Henry liked to stroll there each morning, stroll being a relative term, as his arthritic knees forced him to move slowly. Still, it was part of his daily routine, giving him a reason to get out and chat with neighbors. He would arrive around 9 a.m., greet anyone present with a warm smile, and settle into an armchair by the large window. Often, he propped his cane up against the corner of the lobby bench or set it aside along the wall. After all, one needed both hands free to pour coffee or unfold a newspaper. Usually, the cane was only a few steps away, in plain sight. Most neighbors found Henry's presence charming. Children from the block occasionally stopped by to say hello, showing him pictures they'd drawn, or to marvel at his old war stories. The cane was as much a fixture as Henry himself, a quiet testament to a man who refused to let old age isolate him. "Keep moving. That's the trick," Henry would say with a grin when folks asked about his morning walks. Of course, no routine in Brookside Hills could remain free from Karen's scrutiny for long. Over time, she noticed Henry's cane leaning near the communal bench. Once or twice, Henry forgot to pick it up promptly when leaving and had to return minutes later. This gave Karen the opening she'd sought. An item, left in a common area, could be grounds for complaint. She made a mental note, though she waited until she had an excuse to formalize it. One drizzly afternoon, Henry's arthritic pain flared. He visited the community hall, but realized he needed to retrieve an umbrella from his car. Hastily, he left the cane propped by the lounge door, planning to be gone only a minute. That same minute was apparently all Karen needed. As Henry stepped out into the drizzle, Karen entered the hall, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the cane left behind. She snapped photos with her phone, lips twisted in triumph. Now she had evidence of an unapproved item obstructing a communal walkway. When Henry returned, the cane was still where he left it, and Karen was gone. Yet the faint sense of being watched prickled his nerves. He dismissed it, focusing instead on the warm coffee awaiting him. He couldn't imagine that something as innocuous as a cane might become the next item on Karen's condemnation list. A few days later, Henry found a crisp white envelope with the HOA letterhead stuffed into his mailbox. It bore a formal tone, referencing a bylaw about obstructions or personal property left unattended in communal areas. The letter cited a wooden cane that had allegedly been placed or abandoned in the community hall corridor on multiple occasions, describing it as a hazard or potential clutter. The letter read, in part, "Dear Mr. Henry Martin, we regret to inform you that repeated observations confirm the presence of your personal walking aid, cane, left in the Brookside Hills Community Hall's shared space, posing a potential tripping hazard for other residents. If this behavior continues, we must levy a fine of $50 per occurrence, as outlined in Section 4C of the Common Property Guidelines. We kindly request you keep personal mobility items on your person at all times." It was signed by Maribel Karen Farnett, though the typed name read only M. Farnett. Henry's heart sank. He hadn't realized placing his cane momentarily by a bench was an offense. He rummaged through the letter again, hoping for some misunderstanding, but the language was unequivocal. Cane, a hazard, possible fine. Bewildered, he phoned a friend in the neighborhood, a mild-mannered retiree named Tom Caldwell, who also frequented the hall. Tom was outraged. "That's ridiculous," he exclaimed. "Your cane? A hazard." Nevertheless, Henry, not wanting conflict, decided to be extra careful. He told himself he'd keep the cane in his hands or on his lap, no matter what. He dreaded a confrontation with Farnett, whose reputation for pettiness preceded her. If a single letter could cause him this much stress, what more might she do? However, Karen's complaint was only a stepping stone to bigger demands. She had already circulated rumors among a few board members that Henry left the cane in awkward spots, endangering passersby, and that for liability reasons, they might need to ban him from setting it down at all. Soon, the matter escalated into a formal motion at an HOA meeting, spooking Henry further. If the motion passed, they could officially disallow Henry from even bringing his cane into the hall unless physically carried or stored, ironically ignoring that the cane itself was crucial for his mobility. Neighbors began to hear whispers about Farnett's plan, fueling mild outrage. Why target an old man's cane? Some considered it a new low, even for Farnett. But her tactic was cunning. By framing it as a dangerous item, she hoped to disguise her pettiness behind concerns for communal safety. Meanwhile, Henry, gentle soul that he was, felt cornered. He mulled over skipping his daily visits to the hall altogether rather than risk confrontation. Yet, ironically, Farnett's overstep would soon awaken a flurry of neighborhood solidarity, starting with a single neighbor's imaginative idea that would evolve into a flamboyant, unstoppable wave of defiance. Among Henry's friends was Rita Lopez, a lively grandmother who baked cookies for local children's parties. She overheard him talking about the cane fiasco, the threatened fines, and Farnett's plan. Outraged, she told her circle of friends about the situation. Karen Farnett wants to ban Henry's cane from the lounge. Next, she'll ban wheelchairs or walkers, calling them hazards. The others in Rita's circle of crocheters and homemakers shared the sentiment that Farnett had gone too far. "It's not a skateboard or a baseball bat left in the hallway," one insisted. "It's his mobility device." Another pointed out that the Americans with Disabilities Act typically allows for such aids in communal spaces. Farnett's complaint felt borderline discriminatory. Over coffee, Rita found herself venting to Daniel, a neighbor known for his creative flair. A flamboyant artist in his 40s, Daniel had an eye for turning everyday objects into whimsical statements. "We need to show Farnett that canes are essential, not clutter," Rita said. "But how do we do that, short of confronting her head-on?" Daniel's eyes lit up. "I have a thought. What if we turned Henry's cane into a piece of art? Decorate it with ribbons, make it bright, so everyone sees how it's more than some random stick. Then Farnett can't claim it's dangerous clutter. It's a personal item plus an artistic statement. Rita grinned. I love that. But let's expand it. Let's invite everyone in the neighborhood who uses a cane, or knows someone who does, to decorate one. Make it a big event. A cane decorating contest or festival. We'll flood the community hall with canes so Farnett can't single out Henry. Their eyes gleamed with excitement, picturing a room full of colorfully adorned canes, glitter, paint, ribbons, maybe small LED lights. The humor of it tickled them. Farnett tried to brand one old cane as a hazard, and in response, they'd create a flamboyant spectacle of canes that no rule could easily forbid. Within days, Rita pitched the idea to neighbors who were similarly appalled at Farnett's stance. The concept took off. Let's host a cane decorating contest. People who had older relatives or used mobility aids themselves got enthusiastic. Even those who didn't need canes asked if they could purchase or borrow one just to participate in the show of solidarity. Word spread on the neighborhood's social media. Join the cane parade, read one post. Karen Farnett is calling a single cane a hazard. Let's bring dozens of them, decked out in sparkles, ribbons, or crocheted cozies. Shall we stand with Grandpa Henry? The post racked up likes and supportive comments. Henry, at first, was puzzled when Rita told him about the plan. You want to decorate my cane with glitter? He asked, half laughing. Rita insisted it would be done tastefully, maybe with a small crocheted wrap or some gentle designs. We want Farnett to see it's not some piece of trash you leave lying around. It's part of who you are, she explained. Henry felt touched that neighbors cared enough to stage such an event. Behind closed doors, Farnett noticed an uptick in cane-related memes and jokes on the local message board. She scowled, suspecting something was brewing. Meanwhile, the HOA meeting loomed, where she intended to pass a motion labeling canes or walkers unattended personal items, subject to fines. But in a matter of days, her plan would be blindsided by the flamboyant success of the cane festival. As the date for the HOA meeting approached, the entire neighborhood buzzed with talk of the upcoming cane decorating contest set for the same day. Rita and Daniel spread the word widely. Bring your cane, walker, or mobility device to the community hall. We'll provide materials for decorating if you need them. Or come with it already glammed up. Let's have fun, celebrate mobility, and stand by Henry. The response exceeded their expectations. Senior neighbors rummaged through closets for old canes. Younger folks visited thrift stores to acquire cheap canes, excited to bedazzle them. People purchased ribbons in every color, crocheted whimsical wraps, painted swirling patterns, or glued on rhinestones. Some devised comedic themes, like a cane shaped like a candy cane or a wizard's staff. Others stuck to elegant designs, aiming to highlight canes as objects of dignity, not shame. Henry found himself at the center of a swirl. Families dropped by with ideas, maybe affixing small medals to reflect his war service, or painting his name in cursive near the handle. He was overwhelmed but touched. Ultimately, Daniel helped him create a simple but striking design. The handle wrapped in crocheted patterns reminiscent of patriotic colors, and the main shaft adorned with subtle gold leaf designs. It was tasteful yet distinctly unique. Meanwhile, Farnett sensed an unusual tension. Each day, she saw neighbors carrying canes they hadn't used before, discussing contest day. She confronted the HOA president about it, but he shrugged. It's not an official HOA event, so we have no reason to shut it down, he said. Farnett seethed, suspecting the entire affair was a jab at her. Rita and her co-organizers planned the timeline. On the afternoon of the HOA meeting, participants would gather at the community hall with their decorated canes. They'd set up a small display near the stage, turning the hall into a veritable cane gallery. Then, at the meeting itself, they'd carry their canes inside, visually overwhelming any notion that canes were hazardous clutter. The day before the big event, final preparations buzzed in living rooms across the neighborhood. People hot-glued sequins, crocheted last-minute covers, tested small battery-powered LED strings. Children got involved, painting smiley faces or stenciling flowery patterns. The entire block roiled with creative energy. Henry tried to wrap his mind around it. All this for me? He felt indebted, wanting to bake cookies or write thank-you cards. But Rita insisted, just show up with your cane, Henry. That's enough. Let's watch Farnet's face when she sees 100 canes in one place. Henry chuckled softly, imagining the sight. A swirl of relief and gratitude warmed him, easing the dread that Farnet's threatened motion had sparked. In Farnet's mind, this was an insubordination. She felt a creeping panic that if she allowed the meeting to proceed with a hall full of canes, she'd lose face. Yet, short of canceling the meeting altogether, she had no immediate recourse. She privately vowed to press her motion anyway. Surely not everyone would appear with canes, right? The day would soon reveal otherwise. The morning of the HOA meeting arrived, bright and cloudless. The community hall, typically reserved for mild board discussions, was transformed into a bustling hive of creative chaos. As early as 8 a.m., participants arrived with their decorated canes, leaning them in an organized display along the walls. By 10 a.m., the hall practically glowed with color, glittering rods, crocheted covers in rainbow hues, intricately carved wooden staffs, and comedic canes shaped like lollipops or canes topped with plush toy heads. A sign reading Brookside Cane Decorating Contest hung above the door. Rita oversaw a small registration table, awarding each cane a number for an informal Best Design vote. Daniel flitted around, snapping pictures with a broad grin, praising each creation. Henry arrived soon after, hobbling inside but beaming at the spectacle. He marveled at how many canes had turned up. Easily over 100, from brand-new store-bought ones to antiques repurposed with flamboyant flair. Curious neighbors who didn't decorate canes also attended, gaping at the vibrant display. Children ran about, pointing at the wackiest designs. Some folks recorded videos for social media, capturing the hum of excitement. A local blogger interviewed Henry about how he felt. He modestly downplayed it. "I'm just glad folks are standing up for older folks with mobility needs. This is more than I ever dreamed." At around midday, the tone shifted. People began taking seats to prepare for the official HOA board meeting scheduled for 1 p.m. Farnet, the object of much silent tension, had yet to arrive. A hush of anticipation settled as the clock ticked closer. The seats filled, many folks clutching or brandishing their canes, waiting to see Farnet's reaction. Then, at exactly 1 minute before the meeting's official start, Farnet entered, posture stiff. She paused upon seeing the hall brimming with canes, lined along the back wall, propped near chairs, in some cases shimmering with reflective tape. The noise of conversation died as heads turned to watch her. For an instant, Farnet's eyes widened in shock. Then she composed herself, lips pressing into a thin line. She marched to the front, setting her binder on a table. The HOA president, Greg Walters, tapped the microphone, welcoming everyone. He began with typical agenda items, budget updates, landscaping schedules, a brief discussion of holiday decorations. The mood was impatient, though. Everyone knew Farnet's motion about cane hazards was on the docket. Finally, Greg read out. Next item. Proposed policy regarding personal mobility items in communal spaces. Farnet rose, clearing her throat. She tried to speak confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've observed repeated issues where canes or walkers are left in hallways, posing a liability risk. I propose the board adopt a rule imposing fines on such items if left unattended." A wave of murmurs swept the crowd, many brandishing their canes. Farnet's gaze flicked across the sea of color. She realized how outnumbered she was. She forced a professional smile. "It's purely for safety. We must keep hallways clear." Then Henry rose, leaning on his gorgeously decorated cane. The hush intensified. His voice, though soft, carried an unexpected firmness. "Miss Farnet, this cane isn't clutter. It's my legs. If I set it aside for a moment to rest my hands, that's not endangering anyone. And look around. Some folks here use canes daily, or might in the future." He paused, gesturing to the flamboyant display. "We've come together to show these are vital aids, not hazards." Applause broke out. Farnet's cheeks colored. Another neighbor, a woman in her 50s who used a walker, spoke up. "If you ban canes or walkers from being placed anywhere, you effectively ban us from using the facility. That's discrimination." Another neighbor declared. "Look at the turnout. No one is tripping on these canes. We're handling them responsibly. This motion is ridiculous." Farnet sputtered. "I never said ban canes altogether, just that they must not be left lying around." She pointed at Henry. He left his cane near the bench, unsupervised. Greg Walters, the president, stepped in, voice measured. Maribel, I think we all see that was never a real hazard. Henry was always within a few feet. Let's be reasonable. People with mobility issues need to set their canes or walkers down occasionally. The entire hall nodded or murmured in agreement. Farnett attempted to press, but the liability. Greg sighed. We can address liability by clarifying that personal mobility aids are allowed, and common sense applies. If we see them dangerously blocking a narrow passage, we can politely ask for them to be moved. But no fines, no ban. Is that fair? Cheers and applause rippled through the crowd. Farnett recognized defeat. She sat, lips pressed together, as the board swiftly dismissed her proposal. The meeting concluded with a wave of relief. People began rising, canes in hand, some swirling them flamboyantly in silent victory. Farnett exited quickly, ignoring pleas from a local reporter for comment. And thus, in one dramatic afternoon, Henry's cane, and the entire parade of decorated canes, had triumphed. Farnett's attempt to brand them as hazards was overshadowed by the cheerful, unstoppable demonstration. In the days after the board meeting, Brookside Hills hummed with the afterglow of success. Residents remained in high spirits, the cane decorating spree having forged new friendships and reaffirmed the neighborhood's communal bonds. People posted pictures online, celebrating how they'd shut down Karen Farnett's petty rules with glitter and ribbons. Henry, for his part, found himself somewhat of a local celebrity. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to him before now greeted him warmly. Some teased him about being the impetus for the cane revolution. He answered graciously, always pivoting to praise the communal effort. I just needed my cane, he'd say with a chuckle. But you all turned it into a carnival of color. The contested bylaw never materialized, since the board refused to even draft Farnett's proposed language. In a face-saving measure, Farnett claimed she was satisfied the matter had been clarified, but the entire community knew she'd lost a major battle. Meanwhile, the display of canes remained, at least for a while, with some folks continuing to store or show off their decorated staff in the community hall. The HOA had no rules specifically banning that. Local news outlets picked up the story. A short segment aired featuring snapshots of the cane decorating contest, interviews with Henry, Rita, and other neighbors who championed the cause. The piece ended with a shot of Henry leaning on his cane, beaming, overshadowed by a swirl of colorful canes behind him. The anchor concluded, "It goes to show that sometimes the smallest item can spark the biggest show of unity." Henry's perspective on the entire fiasco was bittersweet. He never wanted to cause trouble, but the wave of solidarity warmed his heart. He marveled at how, in the face of one person's rigid stance, the neighborhood had responded with creativity and kindness. He realized Farnett's hostility ironically led to him forging stronger bonds with neighbors, people who previously had been mere acquaintances. He especially appreciated Daniel's craftsmanship. The artistic crocheted wrap, gold leaf swirl, and subtle additions turned Henry's once plain cane into a personal work of art that drew compliments wherever he went. Young kids asked if they could replicate such designs for their grandparents. Daniel even joked about launching a side business customizing canes for seniors nationwide. Meanwhile, Farnett's aura of intimidation waned significantly. She still held a seat on the HOA board, but her proposals were met with skepticism. People politely brushed off her attempts at lecturing them on compliance. The tide of public opinion had turned, and Farnett found herself with diminishing influence. She tried pivoting to more mainstream tasks, like scheduling landscaping vendors, staying silent on further expansions of rules. The crisis might have ended quietly there, except that in a final petty twist, Farnett stewed, resentful that her authority had been challenged. She resolved to find some new angle to reassert her control. If canes were protected, maybe she could clamp down on improperly stored bicycles or loud teenage skateboards. But that was a battle for another day. For now, Brookside Hills enjoyed a lull of positivity, with Henry's cane as a symbol of that improbable victory. The synergy of neighbors painting an everyday object with bright color and flamboyance, just to defend one man's right to a comfortable existence, remained a lesson in how, ironically, Karen Farnett's cruelty had sown the seeds of community empowerment. Months flowed by, and Henry Martin continued his daily visits to the community hall. He always had his cane in hand, now an undeniably personal statement, thanks to its crocheted artistry. No one complained about it leaning for a few minutes against a bench or near a door. Even Farnette, on the rare occasions she crossed paths with him, kept her distance rather than risk further public backlash. At some point, a younger neighbor launched a mobility aids creativity drive, extending the concept to wheelchairs, walkers, and crutches. Folks with such devices could decorate them in bright patterns or personal designs. A few times a year, the community hall hosted mobility fairs where seniors showcased their newly spruced-up aids, turning the previously dreaded notion of assistive equipment into something to celebrate. The entire tone of Brookside Hills evolved, leaning more inclusive, more cheerful. For Henry, life took on a richer quality. He found himself at the center of small gatherings, invited for afternoon teas, recognized at block parties as the reason we all discovered how to stand up to pettiness. He remained humble, often remarking that if Farnette had simply let him keep his cane in peace, none of this would have happened. But neighbors assured him, "It's better this way." She forced our hand, and we discovered how strong we can be together. Even Farnette, though not penitent, curbed her aggressive rule enforcement. The board, seeing the backlash, insisted on a more compassionate approach. They updated the guidelines to clarify that essential mobility items were exempt from unattended property restrictions. Farnette signed the update with gritted teeth. Some suspected she recognized the unstoppable wave of sentiment behind Henry's cause. In subsequent HOA elections, Farnette faced considerable opposition. She narrowly retained a seat, but lost major clout. Meanwhile, the new board president praised the neighborhood's capacity for unity. With the passing of time, Farnette's name receded from daily conversation, replaced by more positive talk of volunteer projects or seasonal fairs. She had not exactly admitted wrongdoing, but her overshadowing presence gave way to a calmer, kinder environment. On the one-year anniversary of the cane decorating contest, the community hall hosted a small celebratory event. This time, a retrospective display of pictures from that day. Henry found himself moved, scanning the photos of neighbors laughing while painting canes. He recognized how that single moment of adversity had blossomed into a memory of communal triumph. He paused at a photo capturing him, cane in hand, next to a row of flamboyantly bedazzled walking sticks. He remembered the tension in Farnette's voice that day, her shock at seeing so many canes. A soft chuckle escaped him. Who would have thought that a piece of wood could spark such a revolution? Sipping punch from a paper cup, he strolled the hall, greeting newer residents who wanted to hear the story firsthand. "It started with Ms. Farnette calling my cane a safety hazard," he explained gently, "and ended with a festival of canes. We discovered there's no rule that can stifle neighborly goodwill." Outside, the summer sun cast a warm glow over Brookside Hills, the lawns pristine, the houses uniform, but the spirit within them changed for the better. An ordinary suburban community had proven that, faced with petty tyranny, creativity and collective action could flourish. The Cane Parade, as some called it, remained a cherished memory for all who had witnessed the glitter and ribbons standing up to rule-bound aggression. In this quiet, unremarkable corner of American suburbia, a humble cane, once labeled dangerous clutter, had inadvertently become a beacon of solidarity, ensuring that, as Henry would say, no neighbor's mobility or dignity is threatened by foolish regulations. And so, day by day, Brookside Hills moved on, still neat and orderly, yet far less willing to let a single Karen define the limits of their kindness or the shape of their everyday lives.